5:45 p.m. Announcing Coral and Nev of Pleasant Avenue, says the stupid town crier my parents employed to announce each guest as they arrive. I didn't know about this. I would have vetoed it straight away if I knew about it. I don't know if I feel more embarrassed for myself or the poor sap who's dressed in the Beefeater's outfit. Coral and Nev look like a couple. They don't touch, which means they could have done it. And the moment they arrive, they go their separate ways. Sounds like a married couple. Nev stares at Niall sitting on the hammock chair like his prey, probably because the average person doesn't see that many albinos in their daily travels. The other reason he could be staring at him is because there's no one else to look at. As usual, Nev shakes my hand as though it's a threat to national security. He always seems intent on squeezing it until it's dead, or at least completely devoid of venom. Thankfully, he spies the keg mid-shake, loosens his grip, and my hand escapes a certain death. Coral lunges forward to fill the vacant space. I move, not so much to avoid the kiss she tries to plant on me, but the cloud of vanilla mist that surrounds her. Me moving throws her off balance, and she catches me on the collar instead of the lips. Unperturbed, she produces a cheap cotton shirt from inside a bag and places it against my back to see if it fits. "If you don't like this, I'll take it back," she says. "Thank you," I say. I wonder what she'd do if I said I didn't like it. It's best not to say what you mean. I never understand why we have to be honest with each other. I think it's always better to be friends. 5:48 p.m. Announcing Mr. Price of Pleasant Avenue and Gail, Trish, Colleen and Tim of TAFE. Gail's the big bone woman from TAFE who has a crush on me. Trish and Colleen are two divorcees and Tim is a Monty Python freak. Tim loves being silly and speaking in a British accent. Sometimes in class he passes me a note with a funny line written on it, which I'm supposed to respond to with a funny line and send it back. It took me a while to understand it's better to write the first thing that comes into your head rather than put down something you remember from some other time. Why is everyone so early? Are they planning to leave early? Gail makes the big mistake of making eye contact with Mr. Price. I should have warned them. When you feed a stray, they follow you everywhere. 6 p.m. Announcing Craig Melvey and Shona Perry of Pleasant Avenue and Ocean Road. This is the first time I've met Craig's fiancée, Shona. She's suntanned, with a black bubble of hair. In 10 years, I see her in a skimpy tennis outfit with pale, spongy thighs. Craig is obviously looking to reinvent his mother through marriage. Maybe Craig just wants to move into the future with a familiar face beside him. I hate Craig. He's my least favourite person in Pleasant Avenue. They give me a pewter mug with my name engraved on it. We chat for 10 seconds, then Nev, who's installed himself as barman, fills it up with a frothy beer and forces me to drink it in one go. I'm from a long line of bilious people. Drinking beer fast is dangerous, but since everyone is looking at me, I do it. I like to please, and it's not often a crowd of people watch me do anything. It takes 3 goes to get it down, but I do it. When I finish, I fix on one spot for a few seconds to make sure it doesn't come straight back up. I encourage Craig to stay in the bar area and help Nev. I want him close by the gate, so when the Gumleys arrive, they see someone they respect. 7 p.m. My party is at the stage where folk don't know each other well enough to relax, and I'm not charismatic enough to glue the whole thing together. It's okay, but people are looking about, trying to see if something more interesting is happening in another part of the yard. Coral helps Mum carry a tray of nibblies around. She walks beside Mum and acts as if she's helping. fake busy I call it. You place your hand lightly on an item already being carried and grimace as if you're helping. I do it all the time. There's an uncle and an aunt clinging together near the back door. Craig, Shona and Nev are at the keg. Gail, Trish, Colleen and Clive speak with Niles on the hammock chair. 10 people to go before the party takes off. One thing working for me are the little pieces of cardboard I set about the place. Whenever I'm in an awkward conversation, I simply bend down, pick up a piece of cardboard and fondle it. I feel much more comfortable when my hands are occupied. 7:25 p.m. Announcing Lexi 3 of Pleasant Avenue. Lexi 3 appears at the side gate with the impact of a spotlight. She's dressed in a full-length cheesecloth garment with Indian-style embroidery on the chest. Her frock is like a translucent bathroom door. In other words, you see bits and pieces of what's supposed to be private. I've had a crush on Lexi since, well, forever. Crushes come and go. You see a dress blow up or the back muscles of a labourer ripple as he reaches for a brick, and for 20 minutes you're smitten with that person. This crush with Lexi is different. It's unbreakable. I've got Craig well placed at the door, so all I need is Lexi to stand to the rear of the yard, the only section of our place visible from the Gumleys, and everything is ready. I hate to use her like this, but it's important that Gumleys see people they're comfortable with. The only way I can keep Lexi at the rear of the yard is to set Coral onto her. If I tell Coral that Lexi wants to talk about nursing, Coral will absolutely relish the chance to advise her. If she starts taking Lexi through the good and bad doctors at the main hospital, she'll have Lexi pinned down for weeks. 7:30 p.m. As a lure to get Lexi to the rear of the yard, I tell her I've got some dirt on the Gumleys. I whisper, "Meet you down the back in a minute," to add some mystery. Then I employ phase 2 of my plan. I tell Coral that Lexi wants to chat to her about nursing. I barely finish the sentence and Coral's off. 8:02 p.m. A beeping noise attracts everyone's attention. Anything unfamiliar on Pleasant Avenue instantly creates interest, and since a pager sounds rather like an alarm, it gets people talking. It's Nev's pager. Mr. Price quickly grabs the initiative and tells as many people as he can that Nev's a volunteer for the civil defence. 8:04 p.m. Nev disappears inside our house, I assume to make a phone call. 8:06 p.m. Nev tells me that a light aircraft is missing in the mountains and his shift has to help with the search. Nev apologises, wishes me happy birthday and leaves. Nev leaving is good. I'm the only person who knows why he has to go, so for the next 20 minutes everyone comes up to me to ask what the problem with Nev is. Charisma is a mixture of good bone structure, nice eyes and some information that no one else has. 8:30 p.m. Announcing Lexi 1 of Pleasant Avenue. She's a goddess in capri pants and a blue top with thin straps that casually fall off her shoulder every 40 seconds. She appears to hover a few centimetres off the ground. Even in the darkness, she glows like radium in a regional museum. She sights Lexi 3 and makes her way over to her as if she's embarrassed to be seen talking with anyone else, except Lexi 3, that is. The moment they're together, they start creating an intimidating wall of cool. The arrival of Lexi 3 and Lexi 1, plus an uncle and an aunt from my father's side, brings the numbers to 15. All I need are the Gumleys, Ken Sorensen and Virginia Fleming to make the party a success. 8:35 p.m. I told my mother that stew is an odd meal to serve at a 21st. You should see the look on people's faces as they tuck into it. It tastes nice, but combined with alcohol, it forms a better brick in the stomach. If we were miners in the north of England during the 1890s, stew would be perfect, but we're middle-class people with soft hands. We don't need to eat food that will sustain us during a harsh northern winter. I also discover that when I'm tipsy, I drop the G's off words and talk loudly. How you doing? Where you going? And so on. And I have this urge to pull my pants down all the time. I don't actually do it, but I know I could. I give everyone a shock when I bend over in front of Mr. Price, point my bottom at him, and do a funny voice to make it appear as if my bum is talking. Mr. Price doesn't mind. A friend is a friend, and you're lonely. 8:45 p.m. It's interesting to note the changes in people after a few drinks. Most people are exaggerations of their normal selves. Mr. Price is the same, except he gets more words per sentence than when he's sober. My father goes ruddy in the face, but remains a good listener. Such a polite man. People seek him out because he listens until your sentence is completely finished. My mother just gets busier, her personality barely detectable under the cover of repetitive tasks. As she picks up glasses, some guests forget she's even there. Instead of saying anything to her as she takes away their empty glasses, they just stick out the hand without a word being exchanged. Coral, like Mr. Price, is an exaggeration of her normal self. The inside of Coral's mind is like a wool store with thousands of bales of the same product waiting to be shipped out at the first opportunity. Whenever someone sits beside her, she tries to unload as many stored thoughts onto their vessel as she can. Craig Melvey, on the other hand, is determined to drain the keg by himself. You can almost hear beer lapping against the walls of his stomach, like the bow waves from an overcrowded leisure boat. 9 p.m. Announcing the arrival of Mrs. Gumley. Suddenly, Mrs. Gumley appears at the side gate. As people become aware of the Queen of Pleasant Avenue, the frail fawn disguised by Carla Zampatti, everything goes quiet. Heads turn and jaws drop. They watch Mrs. Gumley float across our lawn like a bluebottle on the tide. She nods at Craig and others who catch her eye. There's no Mr. Gumley, no Dick Gumley, no Mal Gumley, just Danny Connors trailing behind like a sentient gas at room temperature. Mrs. Gumley stops and kisses me. Her lips are soft, like two triple treats. Everyone's looking at us. I feel eyes all over me. Oh, this is good. This is very good. This is so good. This is what I want. Are the others coming? I whisper. Just me, says Mrs. Gumley. Danny, who's standing close behind her like a sucker fish, looks at me as if he'd like to be anywhere else in the world. They've been called out on an urgent matter, he says. Drink? I say, making eye contact with his forehead rather than his piercing eyes. Danny says, not for her. Then he whispers, I didn't know you two fuckers were neighbours. If I'd have known you two fuckers were neighbours, I wouldn't have given you that 50 to drive her home. 9:03 p.m. Coral and Mrs. Gumley talk. They appear to get on well for two people who are supposed to dislike each other. What I envisage tonight is a stream of people asking me questions about the Gumleys, them being impressed by what I've told them telling someone else what I said, then the someone else coming over to me to confirm what they've just heard. 9:05 p.m. I've positioned myself in a central location so the guests can see me. 9:06 p.m. Mrs. Gumley talks with Mrs. Melvey. 9:10 p.m. Mrs. Gumley talks briefly with Mr. Price. 9:12 p.m. Mrs. Gumley talks with my mother and Mr. Price. 9:15 p.m. We're just about to start the 21st formalities, that is, the speeches, the key presentation, singing Happy Birthday, the cutting of the cake, when about 20 Norfolks suddenly appear at the side gate. The Norfolks are the cool surfers from my local beach. My mother was right. Kegs do attract hoodlums. Mongrel, Tonk, Nugget, Brainiac, Sparrow, Mouse, Filthy Phil, Scrotum, Beak, Bong, Voicebox, Wolfman, Little Dick, Mo and Sue, friend of Mo, and others I don't recognise, probably grommets, appear as a giant dancing scrum, strangely balletic, essentially yobbo. I enter the yard as one, stopping briefly in front of me like a drugged wildebeest to relay their birthday greetings before continuing onwards to the bar. They snatch the beer gun and take turns to stick it in their mouths and guzzle from it. Each time one finishes guzzling, he goes, ah, ah, ah. Then he passes it on to the next guy. When Brainiac finishes, he yells, I've got glandular fever, who's next? I'm flattered that they've crashed my 21st, but I tell my parents that we should delay the speeches a little. Oh, note well, my party is a success. 9:30 p.m. I managed to chat with Lexi 3 while Lexi 1 goes to the toilet. What did you want to tell me? Asked Lexi 3. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Well, that's what my eyes are saying. I make sure I look upwards so my eyes look bigger. I pout so my lips look swollen and sexy, and I keep my hand under my nose so it turns up at the end. I'm so busy trying to hide my flaws, I can't think of anything to say. I needn't have worried. Coral joins us and takes over the conversation. She's oblivious of the fact we may be chatting about something different. I assume Coral picks up where she left off. Now, a few years ago, I had my head cut off to remove a growth, and the only place you want to have your head cut off is the main hospital, she says. I creep off at this point because I've heard this before. 9:45 p.m. The Norfolk start up a chant of, oh beer, oh beer, oh beer, oh beer. As host, it's my job to make sure guests feel comfortable, so I walk over to Mongrel, who's surrounded by sunburnt disciples, to find out what the trouble is. No old beer, what's the story? He says. Sorry, I say. As punishment, you must drink from the Spanish wine bag for 21 seconds. 3 Norfolk suddenly grab me, wrestle me to the ground, and hold me down while Mongrel squeezes white wine from a Spanish wine bag into my mouth for 21 seconds. It reminds me of when I had anaesthetic once. The only difference is that in hospital, my shirt wasn't saturated with white wine. 10:15 to 10:30. I'm busting for a wee, but the toilet is occupied. I go away for a while and come back, but it's still occupied. I have to go. So I gently push open the door, saying, hello, hello, as I go. Mrs. Gumley is slumped on the toilet seat. Her head hangs down like a branch loaded with fruit. Her legs are spread, her undies around her ankles. Mrs. Gumley, I whisper. No answer. Our family's not good in a crisis. We're not the type of people you need in an emergency. If you want people to panic, get in the way, or stand around and watch, we're your people. So I start reversing out. I'm almost out the door when her head rises and her eyes open. You all right? I say. Her head immediately falls backwards like an infant's skull. You all right, Mrs. Gumley? After a dramatic struggle, she manages to stabilise her head in the upright position. She looks at me. Her head is quivering under the strain of keeping it up. Hug me, she says. You want me to get Danny? Please hug me. She reaches out with her arm until it touches me. Then she places her open palm on my shoulder and applies as much downward pressure as she can muster. She's like an ailing queen knighting a faithful servant during the last days of her reign. I kneel down, careful not to put my knee on her undies, which are already stretched to breaking point between her ankles. Her dress is hitched up so high I could peek, if I was that way inclined. Do you want me to get Danny? I say, giving each word in the sentence breathing space. Hug me, she says. Since this is the third time she's asked me, I do as she says. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Someone wants to go to the toilet, Mrs. Gumley. We have to go. I go to break away, but I realise being caught with Mrs. Gumley mightn't be a bad thing for me. It could be a talking point. Before I decide on a plan, the toilet door is opening and my mother's face appears. Sandy, it's time. The sight of me kneeling in front of Mrs. Gumley stops her train of thought. All I can think of to say is, sorry. I don't know why I apologise. After all, it's my 21st. I can hug an older woman in a toilet if I want. Must be a reflex action. All I want to do is chase my mother and explain the situation, but Mrs. Gumley's muscles petrify and I can't break the hold without using force. Other people want to use the toilet, Mrs. Gumley. Don't go. I'll get Danny. Instead of doing as I say, we kiss. Our first kiss is more of a peck to see what type of reaction we both have. It feels like I'm giving someone who's been lost in the desert a big drink. We kiss again and again. The third time, her mouth widens. I could fit my entire head inside. What am I doing? She's the wife of an underworld figure. I recoil, but it's so hard to stop myself. I'm reaching a point where lust is controlling me. It's making my eyes close, my pelvis twitch, and my tongue go in and out of her mouth. Bail out, Sandy, bail out, says the tiny voice of reason inside my head. Suddenly, the canopy flies off. I'm airborne. My chute opens, and the next thing I know, I'm returning safely to earth. She pleads with me to stay, and I see a genuine need in her cloudy eyes, but it's wrong. If I'm going into the unknown, I should get my 21st key and use the proper door. 10:35 p.m. My mother, father, Coral and Niles are waiting by the sculptured wave cake, beckoning me to come forward and stand with them.
And a bit of shush, thank you,
Yells an anonymous voice.
Turn the music off.
Yells another familiar voice. I make my way through the crowd.
A bit of shush.
The anonymous familiar voice is my father.
Thank you for coming tonight and celebrating 21 years of Sandy's life,
He says, giggling like he always does when he's nervous, dabbing his round, watery eyes with a big white hanky.
We're proud of him.
His arm hovers above my shoulder, quivering with emotion, but since we never touch, quivering is the best we can manage. There's a lot of unemployed love between the top of my shoulder and the bottom of his forearm.
We're hoping the next 21 years might be a little more prosperous than his last 20.
His uncertain delivery receives a nervous chuckle.
Here's something you wouldn't know. If Sandy was born a girl, we were going to call him Prudence.
The Norfolks instantly start up a Prudence chant. I suppose if my party was bad, I'd have left by now. My father rattles on about my footballing days.
If Sandy could have passed the ball to the left side, he may have played at the elite level.
It's very touching, but so very embarrassing. My mother makes a brief, nervous speech. She talks about my ear for languages and the time the Governor-General talked to me when he visited our school. Out of all the students, he chose Sandy. She maintains the Governor-General chose me because I was well presented, with a college boy cut and sharp creases in my pants. I was at the start of the line, and the poor old twit didn't want to walk down a long row of students on such a hot day. Mongrel also says a few unannounced words. I've known Sandy all my life, he says, and I can say without doubt he's the biggest asshole I know. Then my parents present me with an oversized wooden key, which Mongrel grabs and writes, "Sandy has a tiny penis" on it. 10:40 p.m. As everyone sings happy birthday and Coral carries the huge sculptured wave cake towards me, I see Danny Connors creep back into the backyard. It's hard concentrating on two things at once. Every time I think of two things at once, Diane White comes to mind. The girl from my school who could read and listen to a conversation at the same time, which means I'm doing three things: being the centre of attention, watching Danny, and thinking about Diane White. Anyway, I indicate to Danny that Mrs. Gumley's in the toilet. He obviously understands me because a minute later, as I'm cutting the sculptured wave cake, I see Danny carrying Mrs. Gumley out through the side gate on his powerful shoulder. 10:45 p.m. As the formalities finish, the Norfolks take control of the party, which means only a few slices of Coral's wave cake end up where they're intended to. When a rogue Norfolk hand digs into the creamy wave and throws a piece of cake, it suddenly becomes ammunition for a giant food fight. You make a cake for an 11-year-old and you get what you ask for: immaturity. It's sad to see hours of labour turn into ammo for a food fight, but the food fight will leave an impression on those I need to impress. I'm embarrassed for some of the older guests who are all nicely dressed, although when I see an uncle throw a piece of creamy wave cake at someone, I don't feel too bad. I feel bad for only Coral, but since I can't see her, the feeling subsides and I throw my share of cake. 10:47 p.m. It's weird. During all this mayhem, one tiny thing sticks in my mind. It occurs right at the end of hostilities when the little plastic surfer on top of the wave topples down the cake and disappears inside the cream. It's a small incident, but it catches my eye, and the phrase, "everybody remembers a fall," flashes through my mind. It reminds me of when I fell out of the tree with Mrs. Gumley's cat Tosca. People never refer to that incident by saying, "Ah, there's the guy who climbed the tree to rescue Tosca." They always say, "There's the guy who fell out of a tree holding a cat." People always remember you on the way down. 11 p.m. Snake, plus others, pick me up and thread me into the clothesline while Tonk, a little boiled lobster of a man, stuffs my pants full of coleslaw. You don't realise how cold coleslaw is until it's stuffed in your pants. 11:20 p.m. As I make my way back outside after changing my pants, I discover Coral watching TV in the lounge room. She's on the edge of a seat, engrossed in a news bulletin, oblivious to the 21st storm brewing in the backyard. "What are you watching on TV, Auntie Coral?" I say as one word. "Shh," she says, not looking away from the screen. "What?" I say, as I try to crouch in front of the stereo in a futile attempt to change a CD. Futile because I lose my balance and fall back onto my thin buttocks. It's in times like this I wish I had a well-developed bottom to cushion the fall. "It's the plane Nev's looking for," she says. At first I think, who cares, stupid woman? But when she says the plane was coming from Townsville, the face of Mal Gumley suddenly flashes across my mind like a streaker at the cricket. 12:30 a.m. The Norfolks leave the party how they arrived, except their scrum is nowhere near as balletic as when they arrived. I don't particularly like them, but gee, I'm glad they came. Craig Melvey and Shona leave around the same time. Craig is so drunk he crawls across the road on all fours with his fiancée Shona holding his head up. I bet this won't be the last time Shona does this. Mr. Price has gone. Thankfully, I didn't talk to him. Gail and my other colleagues from TAFE left straight after the Flaming Edgar incident. I won't explain what that is, but I will say it involved the Norfolks, newspaper, and poo. Lexi's 1 and 3 leave soon after them. Only Coral's still here, plus a few relatives, and of course, Niles.
See you, Chris.
he says, staring at me through foggy beer goggles. You might find that's drunk for, can I crash at your place? No matter what we say, we can't convince Niles that he should walk 20 metres and go home. As it turns out, his parents don't even know he's here. So my mother fixes a bed in the sewing room for him. I have to wait until my 21st birthday to have my first sleepover guest. Thankfully for Niles, his parents can't see into our house. A tall hedge with the faces of their ancestors carved into it lines our common fence, and this stops them seeing over to our side. The final sounds of my party are made by Coral as she stacks the last of the clean plates into the cupboard and leaves via the back door, the unmistakable shuffle of her slingbacks fading into yet another Pleasant Avenue evening. The final smell is a pungent smoky odour. I think Niles is smoking pot in the sewing room.